Welcome to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism in Modern Life, hosted by Adam Piercy and Mick Mulroy. Welcome back to Pub and Porch, Applied Stoicism. I'm your host, Adam, with my co-host Mick Mulroy here. Today, we are doing episode 2 of our series on the Odyssey. Today's episode will be on the movie and the myth. And this was an interesting kind of preamble before the show because Mick had seen the episode, I think it was a week or two ago. Is that right?
I'd seen the movie been 2 weeks ago.
Yeah, 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And then I saw it yesterday, like the day before recording this episode, because it doesn't release the same day that we do the editing. So it was interesting going back and forth because I had an initial response and Mick went, "No kidding," and I was like, "Tomorrow's going to be fun." So I think Mick and I have both been kind of looking forward to this episode. I should say as well that one of the reasons why it took me a long time to see it was because I wanted to see it in the laser IMAX 70 millimeter projection, which is the there's only like I think 3 of them in North America, and it's the one that like Christopher Nolan will actually go and watch his film in this way because it's sort of the most pure version of the film, I guess, is in terms of visuals. So we were going to start.
If it was made a difference, but you didn't see it on the regular.
No, I didn't see it in any other format. I think once you see it in any of the 3 IMAX formats, it's fine, right? But
I didn't see it in IMAX.
Yeah, but you didn't see it in IMAX, and you had your own enjoyable experience with it. And I should say, before I go into anything on the movie, I did enjoy watching the movie. But I think we kind of now we get into talking about it. I don't know if I need to say that there's any spoilers. I mean, this is it's almost a 3,000-year-old myth, so I don't think we can spoil the story.
The cat's out of the bag on the story. Yeah, exactly.
Okay, so yeah, but I think that's good. So it's not to know that. All right, so Mick, I think you were hoping that I would start with my review of the movie. Just the movie on its own, or did you want to maybe give us a little bit of context?
So you want to start on the positive?
Let's start on the positive. Yeah, you go ahead.
I mean, I already mentioned it. I think last week I saw the movie. I thought it was exceptional. I'm a big Chris Nolan fan. I mean, a lot of his movies are in my top 10. But obviously, I think part of it is this story gets recreated every generation, right? So it is one of the pinnacle stories of not just Western civilization, but mankind, right? It has set the stage for so much in art and literature throughout history and psychology. By the way, just so I don't forget, there's this psychologist, Sam Akbar. She was on Anya Leonard's classical
wisdom.
Yes, our podcast. Excellent. I would recommend her, and both of them actually, Anya as well as Dr. Akbar. But she's a classics classicist and a psychologist. And so her take on this is fascinating. And her specialty is dealing with PTSD and war, right? So very interesting combination.
Yeah.
Not to digress, but it has, and then of course philosophical, right? So all of the cultural discussions that are going on with this, just to address those, not that we need to, but I mean, as Seneca said a long time ago, people tend to miss the point when it comes to the Odyssey. They debate the nuances. They debate what he called the trivia, missing the major philosophical points. I personally don't have a problem with people debating whatever they want to debate. I think that's everybody's right. So if you're a historian and you're mad because the boat doesn't look the way it should, who am I to tell you not to be mad about it? So, from my perspective, it all makes the story more relevant. It becomes a cultural phenomenon. Even with the debates, even if I disagree with them, it's kind of like that's a bad thing. Because one, I don't get to, you don't get to tell people what they should be concerned about. But two, it does show a pretty major interest in the story, which I think is incredibly important. But to your point on the, and I know I keep jumping back into the Odyssey itself, but I thought the movie was extraordinarily well done. Christopher Nolan has the ability to tell those types of stories that I think other directors simply don't have. So I had a positive, very positive outtake. Now I know some of the nuances are different. I think that's what you're going to get into between the actual story and. But
Sure.
remember, there's like four different really versions of the actual Odyssey,
Yeah, that's right.
right? So I don't have a problem, generally speaking, when people have an interpretation on history. What I have a problem is they just take like a historic event and then just make it about their own story, and it's like you just hijacked it like history for your own thing.
Yeah,
I have a real problem with that. But I didn't view that this way, which especially since the whole thing's based on a myth.
yeah,
Lastly, before I kick over to you, because this is kind of funny, but you think about it, a lot of the vets groups, uh, they got a different theory on this altogether. They get
yeah,
basically, if you look at the path that Odysseus and his posse of 12 ships full of a whooping and a whomping raiders took home, it kind of looks like they just went on a crazy excursion of a whooping and a whomping. I mean,
yeah,
they go from here to there around, Ithaca within view, and 8 of the 10 years he spends shacked up with the chick on an island. I mean, it starts to look like, and I'm kind of joking with this.
no, no, but
It kind of starts looking like, they kind of went on a pirating tour,
yeah,
and then somebody said, "Hey, none of the wives are going to believe this," right? And then they came up with some crazy stuff, right? Some crazy. Oh yeah, but I was with Calypso for 8 years, but I was drugged, that kind of stuff. But anyway, kind of funny, but it really has involved everybody in this very historic Western civilization, like plank holding story
yeah,
that does cover so many, to get serious again, deep philosophical issues that I think Seneca was right ultimately that we should focus on that. But anyway, over to
yeah.
you, man. You saw it on the big IMAX.
No, I think I think you hit on a couple of really good points there, which I think are good, and um, I think this is one of those times where I think the discussion and applied part of what we're talking about I think comes into the fore, right? Because I was ultimately disappointed with the film. Now, I enjoyed certain parts of it, and I want to talk about some of those things. I think just off the bat, right, in terms of the acting, right. Um, Anne Hathaway was incredible as Penelope. She came off to me as the Penelope that I see when I think of these stories. She's a little bit wily herself, right? Coming up with
She
her own way
is.
of hiding the tapestry that she's weaving, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's a very strong casting choice for me for sure. Another one that I want to make sure I highlight early is Calypso. I think it was inspired casting to do Charlize Theron, and I honestly, she played this great line between her love for Odysseus and almost her obsession, which keeps him there, right? And I found that to be a very inspired casting choice. And I think someone was sort of saying, and I hate comments like this because they're so ageist, but someone was like, she's pretty old, is what someone was saying on the internet or whatever, and I was like, okay, but like it kind of misses the point, but also like Calypso is she's a nymph or like a demigod, so she's kind of like in the story, for example, not to jump too quickly into the myth, but she's kind of ageless, right? And so Charlize plays this amazing. She has this care, but also this, you can sense that in her that she has this trepidation about him really finding out more and leaving. And I thought she was a great choice. Tom
Well, she
Holland
probably
as,
was younger depicted in the story, but I don't
yeah,
think
I mean,
they
well, every nymph is
included
like,
it.
half naked and running
Yeah.
around, but yeah,
But
but
I mean, if you get a
definitely.
chance to get Charlize Theron as a, you
I
take
mean,
it. I mean, I'm not a
for her
director,
acting,
but
no, I know,
she's
but the acting
awesome.
she did, yeah, the acting we did, there were these subtle hints all the time, right? Where it was like, okay, she's, And I like the way they did her story, showing that she cared for him essentially originally, and actually cared for him through his initial phases of PTSD, where he was just extremely, um, you know, uh, uh, I hate to call it mentally unstable, but like he was going through some instability in his mental health at
He
the
had
time,
plenty
is
of
what I
that.
recall.
Yeah, we're
Oh
going to
yeah,
talk
for
about the
sure.
PTSD element of this.
Yeah, for sure. And so there's that. I think so Tom Holland as Telemachus, who I do think was very good. It's funny. I saw him last weekend in Spider-Man, so
Well,
that was and that was great.
well,
I
him
thought that was
and
a
Anne
performance.
Hathaway have like how many movies out this summer?
Yeah, I know. It's sort of the summer of those couple people. It's pretty good, and I really like that. And then I think probably the last major one I would say is is uh I can't remember his name. Anyways, but I think what I want to make sure I say is I thought, oh, Robert Pattinson, that's the one. Okay.
Which one did he play?
He played Antinous. He played the guy who was trying to marry Penelope. Prominent guy in the story. I think Robert played this amazing Weasley man who, like,
Hmm.
sometimes you believed him to really care for Penelope, and other times you realize that he was kind of a jerk, and or
Hmm.
not kind of, he totally was. And that I thought was another one. I that was one where I was like, man, he doesn't come off to me like that character. And then in the middle of it all, I was like, nah, he totally played that role great.
Yeah.
So there's
And
great.
in
So
the
there's
real story, he was one that gave the beggar
yeah.
Odysseus a very difficult time and showed his true
Yes,
colors. Yeah.
absolutely. And I think it's him or his friend when Odysseus first arrives in the original stories, when he first arrives in the great hall of the palace, they do like a beggar fight. It's like they have two beggars and they have them fight each other.
Hmm.
It's really not great. But I thought, that was all great. Oh, and I should say one last, because this is the one I was trying to remember, is John Leguizamo, who
Oh,
played
he was excellent.
Eumaeus. Oh,
Yeah.
excellent role.
He's going
He
to
had
get the
this.
Oscar.
Yeah, I think that he stole it for me, where I was just like, I kind of want to see more of him. And I thought his he showed that care, but he also showed that he had this edge because he knew he had to protect everybody. And you know what? And the last one we should say is the dog. I mean, we talked about this before, right, Argus? I thought, I'm so glad they kept that scene in. I mean, it's one of the most prominent scenes
Oh, yeah. It's
in that
apparently
story.
what got Chris Nolan to want to make the movie. He was reading
Yeah,
that scene. Yeah. Or
yeah,
not the
and
scene, but reading that
the
part of the story.
Yeah, and so I'll quickly say as well, just because you're mentioning reading it. So Emily Wilson's The Odyssey, which is her most recent translation of the Odyssey, it is my understanding that's the version that Chris Nolan read, and that's kind of that eventually led to him going, "Oh, I want to read
Oh,
this." And
yeah. Yeah,
I
that
remember
was it.
she said she kind of she found a better interpretation. She was sort of saying about that scene, so maybe it's a little bit different.
Was
So
Tenuous the one in the beginning that like shirked going to Trojan War?
Continuous,
Tenuous, yeah.
yeah. So that part of the
They
story,
depicted in the movie, I think, too, right?
yeah.
Because
So so the thing is Sinon is not in the Odyssey. He's not in the story at all. So this
right,
continuous Sinon crossover event thing,
right,
where they're kind of like Sinon is mentioned in Virgil's Aeneid, but
yeah,
he's not. So he's a
yeah.
later character. Again,
I know. But there was that
we're
same scene when
yeah,
Sinon was in it, but there was
yeah.
also in Tenuous, right? Anyway, I don't want
Yeah. No,
to
no,
throw
but
you off
then
here.
that was one of the first times where I was sort of like, okay, I'm starting to go, because there's a challenge having been an ex sort of classics major, right, and having studied this in the past. I'll bury the lead on what I was going to say at the end is. My friends and I were talking after the movie, and I was not disappointed with the movie as a whole. I was just disappointed in some things that were kind of major to me. I was almost thinking, I wish I didn't know the story, because I got the sense that it was a great film. The problem with being a classicist and knowing this in my past is I kind of
Hmm.
went, oh, that's very different. And there were some themes that we're going to talk about where I was like, hmm. And there were some themes that I thought were brought out very well. So, but ultimately, in terms of the film overall, like I do think, like as a film overall, I think it was very well done. It was nice to see a movie about this that actually really did use the mythology. Now it sort of pick and chose the mythology, and we're going to talk about that too. And that one kind of threw me a bit, because it was like, why pick that over something else when some of those things are common in all the Odyssey stories, for example. But I think it flowed very well. I think the other thing is that it had the major elements I think that we were kind of looking for. And obviously, I mean, look, it's shot in a way that is just so well done because it's Christopher Nolan. One thing I will say, and I don't know what it is, but like I never like the sound mixing in his movies. It never sounds right. It's always everything is so loud and then none of the audio is easy to hear. And it might have been the theater I was in, but I was really disappointed with the sound. And I hate to say that because it's such a technical part of the movie and not the story.
But you
But
mean like the music or just the
so it was all
loudness
over
of
the place. It was all over the place. Like you couldn't hear the audio very well, or like it didn't seem like there was ever a score in the movie. And then the score would kick in, and it was so loud. It was like I could see people around me in the audience covering their ears, and so I think it was partly the theater, but I've never
it?
really
Yeah, that
liked
wasn't in the
the sound
regular
of it.
people's theater.
Yeah. I mean,
The
IMAX is
Bungle in
the
the
whole thing with
Botches
IMAX.
theater.
Yeah, like because IMAX uses a THX like surround thing, and it's
Right.
behind the screen and all that. So the problem is it pulled me out of it because it was so weirdly
Because
mixed.
I mean, I think of his movies and the music usually plays a
Yeah.
profound part of it. Like
Yeah.
Interstellar. I mean, come on, that's like,
Yeah. And so for
and
this
it
one, I
is
mean,
does get loud in Interstellar. I think he does that on
oh yeah.
purpose.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's the scene in Interstellar with the spinning ship, and there and
hundred
they
percent. It's one of my
yeah, and
favorite
there's
scenes,
I
man.
know, and there's a
If not my
ticking.
favorites. Yeah,
No, for sure, and there's this, like, ticking in the background, right? Because 'Cause they're running
yeah,
out of time, and I
yeah.
remember just thinking, like, what an amazing way to use that, and
You
the
know
other
what
term
that
he uses
ticking was actually when they were on the planet? Not to.
no, I don't
It's
know. Oh,
apparently it's supposed to be every 1.2 seconds. It's a year.
oh, that's
It's a
right, it's
year. It's a
or a
year.
day or a
So
year. Yeah, yeah, it's
no, I
because
say it's a year on the planet that they were on with
yeah,
the waves and stuff
yeah.
because of the size,
Oh,
etc.
yeah, no,
Yeah, yeah.
exactly, and I think when he does it that way, it's amazing. There's another ticking he uses in Dunkirk when the Spitfire battle's going on because what happens is Tom Hardy's character flips to the reserve fuel tank, and he's
Hmm.
basically telling the audience he's not going
Right.
home, and there's this
Yeah.
ticking, and I just remember that's such an interesting thing. The music was interesting in this one, though. There wasn't a lot of music, that I could tell actually, which is sort of weird. But I think overall it was very well done. The my one of my major disappointments, I would say, was I hate to call it cherry picking, but there were times that elements of the original story was used and times where it was omitted, and then some of the additional scenes I was thrown a bit because I was like, I don't know that you needed that scene. There was like a scene where
Well,
uh,
go back to what was the
what was
major issue you had with what was omitted?
so there Circe is the nymph
Yep.
that Odysseus meets, and she
With the
turns his men
pigs.
into
Yeah.
pigs. Now he chooses to stay with her. He chooses to stay with her for a year, and they have a son, Telegonus, who's in the Odyssey. He's in
Right.
all versions of the Odyssey, and they omitted that. And so the I think in many ways it's one of those parts of the original story that would have drawn away from the "I have to get home" theme, but at the same
And you
time,
still, even though Odysseus was a flawed
yeah,
hero,
yeah,
I think he might have been trying to keep some ability to like him.
yes,
You see
and
what I mean?
yeah, and
Like if
there's
he
so
had a
that's
kid, and I mean, it's like, come on, man. Like this is anyway.
no, I
I think
know, but
that might have been his effort,
yeah, there's a
right?
part of the story with Cersei that's interesting, right? Because depending on the way that it's translated, right, he chooses to stay, or it's a bargain that he draws with her, and that was an
Right,
interesting part of that. I don't want to skip ahead too much, but
right. We want to get
the
into all
inter
those
right, but
in
no, but
detail. Yeah.
another thing though is part of the interaction with the Cyclops. I'll tell you his name later. That's part of the story as well, but also
Polyphemus, right?
that's right.
Polyphemus. Yeah.
It was interesting to find out like the scenes where the scene where Odysseus and his son meet the first time, like that's not in the original story. I didn't feel like that scene added much. It just felt like it was more violence. Also, can I just say, the scenes with Cersei as well, it was like the most horrifying 5 minutes of the movie, right? When she's turning them into
Mhm.
pigs. That
Yeah.
was incredibly disturbing.
Right.
I was literally like, wow, this is really disturbing. But at the same time, I think that's just kind of part of that. And it
It's
was
intentional,
interesting.
I'm sure. They
Yes,
didn't want to just have it go poof,
yeah,
right?
no,
Finger pain.
exactly.
Like,
I know, and that's kind of
it,
the thing, right? Because the thing about Cersei is she learns. So Cersei's a daughter of Helios and I think
eh,
one of the other nymphs,
that's,
and she learns her magic from the earth. So it's meant to be kind of more natural feeling. That's how, and
mhm.
so all of those animals in her area, they're all because the island I think is uninhabited when she moves there. And so all of that, but that's not an omission, that's just something I noticed. And also an omission in terms of the theme is like and we're going to talk about this, there's a part of the scene with Charybdis, the whirlpool, and Scylla that they
Yes.
changed, where I was like, and they omitted a major decision factor point that happens, and I was like, oh, that's funny the way they did that. But yeah, I think that's the big one for me is the Telegonus storyline. The reason why it's also and I the thing is it's irrelevant into this movie because this is a one off. I think this is just a
So
one off movie.
Telegonus was the son that they didn't portray in the movie.
Yeah, Telegonus was the son they didn't portray
Uh,
in the movie.
I can see why they did that, though.
Yeah, and then
I mean,
I don't. Yes, I can see why they did that. He's more important in larger Greek mythology because there's a later story, the Telegony, which is the story of Telegonus,
uh,
where bearing the lead on that, Telegonus kills Odysseus in a fight. And Telegonus is the one who marries Penelope after Odysseus is laid to rest and honored. So that's a long story. We're not going to get into that part. I think the only other omission I have in a major sense is no Achilles. And Achilles has a really important role in Hades.
and Hades,
Um,
yeah, we're gonna get into that though.
yeah,
But you're
exactly.
right.
We're going to get into that. But I just want to say that's an omission point. I think that's there. But
It's
those are big.
actually a huge. So let's harp on that a bit without going too much. But
Go ahead. Go
it's
ahead.
actually a huge omission because part of Greek culture, ancient Greek culture, was really the hero, right? Like you want
Yeah.
to do something in life that's so magnificent that
Yeah.
you survive on the tongues of everybody in history. And
Yeah.
Achilles is the perfect example of that. And
Totally.
basically, when he gets a chance to say, he's like, "It's all bullshit," right?
Yeah.
I mean, that's a
Yeah.
really that's
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
really big part of it, right?
Yeah.
So it like because the Iliad's all about glorifying, dying in combat and all this stuff,
That's
and then
right.
the guy that we most identify with,
Yeah.
the warrior's warrior, when he gets a chance to talk to Odysseus, it's like,
Yeah.
I'd rather be the slave of the poorest man on earth than
Yeah.
the hero of the dead.
Yeah. And actually, I want to point something out quickly because there was a lot
So
of
it's a big
hate.
omission. That's a big
It is a big
omission.
omission, but and I want to point something out about it just because I can and I think it's important to say, like, everyone was so up in arms about the casting of Elliot Page, right? And people thought that Elliot Page was playing Achilles because
Yeah, yeah,
in the Hades scene, Elliot Page is the one um, talking to Odysseus the most until
yeah.
Tiresias tells him
They
stuff.
probably saw like a snip of it and figured that
Right,
was
and they were
Achilles
and
or something.
right, and he's sort of talking about there's themes around Sinon's interaction with Odysseus that actually are similar to the Achilles interaction in the story. I should say as well, like shout out to Elliot. That was probably one I should have said as well because Elliot did a really amazing job portraying that scene because I know the scene like it's you and I both know the scene very well, right? But it's interesting to me that why didn't they just have Achilles there? It just seemed odd, right? But there's a connection between Sinon and the horse and all of that. But even then, Sinon's presence in the movie is a little bit odd to me. So this is one where it's an add-on, where it's like Sinon's not even in the Odyssey. He's not in the Telegony.
Right.
He's never. He's only in the Aeneid.
I
The
probably
Aeneid.
wanted to add the actor in there for Hollywood
Right, and make
reasons.
the connection. There's the I get the connection between the scene with the horse, which we're going to talk about it later. But yeah, so that was probably the only one. But Elliot Page is another one. Really amazing job doing the acting, and in a scene that is so crucial to that
Yep.
Hades trip. Because the thing you get from Tiresias is he tells Odysseus what to do next. But that's in
Yep.
many ways
He
kind of
does.
irrelevant. Actually, and also that was an interesting one. Tiresias tells him things that Cersei had told him in the story, but again, it doesn't really matter, but Elliot did a really great job in that scene, and I really liked that bit. So that's but the thing was in that moment is I had to remember that he was Sinon and not Achilles because it seemed like that's what I'm saying. I think the hate towards
He
Elliot
just
is
never came
silly.
across as Achilles to me, man. At least the
No, but
way
what
I
I
did.
mean, no, for sure. I
Uh,
just mean the themes. Like like some of the stuff he's saying. I'm kind of like, oh yeah, I guess I can see why people thought he was Achilles, but also I don't know, the whole I that hate was completely ridiculous. I don't understand. People, it's a mythical story. Like the whole thing about,
I know, but
you know,
I don't really want to get
Helen.
into
No, 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 I get it too. But
well, I'm not avoiding it on purpose.
no,
It's just
no,
not
but
that.
yeah,
But the
it's not our,
problem
not
is
our theme
when
today.
people get outraged in one occurrence because it's
Yeah,
like perfectly historic, but then in
yeah,
another occurrence they're not, means that they're really not outraged at all.
I know.
It's just fake political BS, and it
Baloney.
works
Yeah.
both ways, right?
Oh
You
yeah.
can't be outraged in one case and then
Yeah, for sure.
not in another,
Yeah.
or you're. I mean, the way I view
No, I
it,
get it.
part of the problem,
Yeah, exactly.
right?
Totally
Like
get
if
it.
you want it to be historic in one case, then you need it to be historic in all of them.
Right.
Or you're not. It's not really about history. You're just promoting your very specific political agenda.
Yeah, totally. So
Yeah.
that's my initial takeaway. Overall, I was
But that
more
had nothing to
disappointed
do
than
with
not.
that character, by the way. I mean,
Would say?
you could certainly, that had nothing to do with that character, right?
No,
He could
no, it had
easily,
nothing to do with that
or she
character.
could
Yeah,
have
yeah.
played that.
He can,
That's
yeah,
fine.
yeah. He did a
Yeah.
great job, and
Yeah.
I
He
think
did a
that's
good
the thing
job.
to highlight. Like I think that's another one that's kind of a sleeper role. What I really liked about it is they had this sort of the real. I say one more thing about Hades. I really like the fact that they showed what actually that looks like. Because people talk about the sacrifices, and they realize that you have to understand it's a blood thing. It's a blood sacrifice.
Yeah. The
So
Greeks viewed Hades as like that way. They viewed it
that's
going
right.
out to the ocean, not down,
Yeah,
right? And then
you
you
were
had
on
to
the far shores.
keep going, and you hit
Yeah,
Hades, and then you had to do a ritual with blood and honey and all this other, you
yeah,
know, weird
yeah.
pagan stuff. And then people started kind of flowing out of Hades.
Yeah, but overall, yes, and I think that was very good that they did that. Like, because you will see it even in the 1960s one with Kirk Douglas, where he goes down into Hades, and I remember thinking like he goes away, they go
That's, yeah,
away,
because
and it's
it's
kind
the
of a
Judeo-Christian view of it.
yeah, exactly. So, but ultimately, the key themes of Xenia, the theme
Then,
about
yeah,
how the Trojan War really ended this classical Bronze era and led to the next phase of Mediterranean evolution. I think
yep,
that was really well done. And so that's the
yeah.
thing is that it's really tough, but for me to say I was disappointed. It was just there were some big bits where I was like thrown. Anyways, so there we go. So let's get started on these
So
topics then.
you didn't seem to be that critical of it, man. I thought you were going
No,
to
no.
come in barrels
Oh,
blasting.
no, no, I'm not. I'm not like that,
I
anyways,
mean,
right?
because I
Because the
mean,
thing
let's
is,
just
like,
face it.
respect people.
It's an incredibly long story, and you got
Oh,
to put it
I
into
know.
3 hours. It was
It's
already
literally,
3 hours, right? So
yeah. It's the
I keep
story. It's the
going. You
story
got
that
to cut
invented
some
the word
stuff.
epic.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. It's the story that invented the word epic. I mean, I was, one thing is for 3 hours it moved like that. Like I was really surprised at how quickly it moved.
It has like
When
a
I first,
97% Rotten Tomatoes from
yeah,
the
yeah,
audience and like a 94, 95 from the
yeah.
critics, which is
Well,
kind
for
of
sure.
unheard of.
Yeah. So let's talk about some elements, and you had a really good list
Yeah.
here I liked. So let's talk about some elements. Let's talk about the Trojan horse, right? So the Trojan
Yeah.
horse, I think the one thing that Nolan did very well was not have the Trojan horse start the movie because that's not how that's not how the story starts anyway.
Yes.
But what's
You're
your
right.
first take on the Trojan horse part of the film?
So, they kind of depicted, well, there's a couple parts to it, right? Obviously, it was one of the most consequential deceptions in military history, right? So everybody is trying to look at some kind of version of that for the element of surprise, which is a key factor in combat.
Yeah,
It isn't so much. I like the way they depicted it because it seems so much more realistic than every other depiction of it. How crappy it
yeah,
was to be in the horse and
yeah,
dragging it and shoving spears in it. Like they didn't just
yeah,
assume that it didn't have people. I mean, I thought it was very well done visually, if we're still talking about the movie. But the other part of it is what happened after they got out, right? So, the
yeah,
mass execution of not just soldiers, but women and children
yeah,
and the elderly, which I'm sure is probably the case. In fact, when I was used to read a lot about Troy, like the historic Troy, one
yeah,
of the one of the indications that they found the actual uh, castle, if you will, was a mass death at a certain time. They
right,
saw like a lot of people move into the encampment, and they brought a lot of food, water, a lot more stuff. Looks like they're preparing. And then right after that, there was a substantial death that also included not just soldiers, but
Yeah.
women and children, right? So I think that's probably accurate. I mean, we don't know, but that's probably the way war was done back then. And of course, all the sex slaves and such.
Yeah.
And there is DNA evidence that I read. So historians correct me if I'm wrong. That there was a movement of DNA genetics from that part of Turkey, modern day Turkey, back to Ithaca
Yeah.
and the other areas around Greece,
Hmm.
which also indicates that the story happened and it
Yeah.
happened in a brutal way,
Yeah.
as we would expect. So I think, it depicts PTSD, and I think PTSD as a non clinician, but certainly somebody that's very familiar with it, is when it comes to war, a lot of it's just based on one word. It's shame.
Right.
It's just shame. And sometimes it's real and sometimes it's perceived, where people feel like they did something that they never should have done. And they will question whether, even if it's flat out combat, even if it's, man on man,
Hmm.
it's, there's still questioning in your head long after the war. And certainly if you did something that you knew was wrong, and I don't care what era you lived in humanity, killing a child's clearly wrong. It's shame. Or it's shame in a way that's not actually, by most objective standards, accurate. Like, I survived. All my friends didn't. You shouldn't have shame for that necessarily. You just survive. But there is a self-imposed shame on that gives you what people today would call PTSD. I think Odysseus, at least how it was presented in the movie, probably more so than any other version I've seen, is that he had this that lingered with him. So I think that was a very important part of the movie, and I think a lot of veterans who obviously connect with the movie anyway, because you go to war, all the things that happen.
Got to come
Um,
home.
you got to come home.
Yeah.
That is a process throughout history that has changed substantially. One of the issues that in the modern war version, it's too fast. Ironically, right?
Yeah.
In the old war version, you would have stages when you returned to home.
Yeah.
In like the GWAT, you would literally have, and this is flat out true, you'd literally be on a mission, a very kinetic, violent mission. You would come back. I've come back from a mission and actually been dropped off at the airport
Right.
to get on a plane going to Dulles.
Right.
You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and then you're off at Dulles and you're in your minivan.
Yeah.
And you say, well, that sounds great. Actually, it's really psychologically
Jarring.
um, jarring,
Yeah.
right? Where you're like in the minivan, you're going to pick your kids up at school to take them to soccer, which is great.
Yeah.
But in the old days, that was a process. You were with like you went together as a unit, you came home as a unit, you had all these checkpoints, so to speak, medical, blah, 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 checking out, turning in your gear, going back to Kansas. And then you probably, even at the end of the road, you're probably with three dudes who came from your town went to fight World War II. You see what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
now this is just constant. Then you're back. So there is that process that all vets get. It's not 10 years, right? To get home. But there
Yeah.
is that process of going home. And we'll get into this because it's really important part of the story. What always baffled me is you're really pulling for Odysseus to get home, right? And
Yeah.
then he freaking leaves.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah.
he leaves, and he's like, "Hey, I don't have any money. They looted me. Now I got to go whooping and whopping to get more money." I mean, it's like, whoa, dude. You're like, I was pulling you for the whole time, and as soon as you had an opportunity, you left your
Yeah.
wife and kid, and. But anyway, to that point on PTSD, I do think they depicted it well. And PTSD is all different, right? You could see a car accident and have one. You don't have anything to do with it, but this is very unique to conflict and the combatants in conflict. And
Yeah.
that's what I think they depicted here pretty well.
Yeah. And I think that was very good. I think there is a point in the and it wraps up throughout the film near the end as well, where they highlight, you know, Odysseus is on the steps to the main square, I guess, and the horse is next to him, and he kind of has this moment where he looks around and he realizes what he has done through coming up with this
Yes.
cunning plan, right?
Yes.
And that's a really interesting kind of point. I don't remember feeling that from the story when I read
I
it,
didn't either. I didn't.
but at
It
the
was
same
just
time,
viewed as smart. Yeah.
yeah. And I honestly think, that was a very strong way to do that, to kind of link it all together, right?
Hmm.
Because, the whole act of the lie, the gift, right? And all of those things, right? And then it being brought into someone's home under false pretense, that does tie in with Xenia. It's interesting because Homer doesn't make that
It
statement, and
does.
that,
You should
yeah,
explain Xenia, the whole concept of the
yeah.
stranger, etc.
Yeah, that's right. So one of the biggest, like in all the myths, you hear it, right? Where a traveler goes to a palace, and the palace is like, "Oh, we must feed you," right? This is
Right.
this Greek concept of Xenia. It's sort of like an openness to travelers. They come to you asking, and then you're meant to give, and they are meant to be in a safe haven, right? So it was viewed that doing anything in the opposite of that was extremely antithetical to, the edicts of Zeus, for example. And that is, I think, very much like, it's actually really prevalent in the film in a way that it isn't really in the original story. But the reason why Homer doesn't say, well, you violated Xenia, it's because he didn't have to, because in Greece at this time, that is literally the biggest thing, right?
Hmm.
You help someone along the way, and you bring them in, and then you must care for them. And so to injure your guest, or to be a guest under false pretense and then injure your host, I mean,
Hmm.
they're essentially cardinal sins, right? Like, they're, one of those
Yes.
things that
And that exists in a lot of cultures, actually. But you're right.
absolutely, right?
Xenia.
Yeah, and you see it, and what's really interesting is you even see it between other, other people of the same household, right? The Clytemnestra and Agamemnon story is one of those, and I really liked how that was in the film. We'll talk about that in the underworld part, but
Hmm.
this idea of Xenia is this openness, right? And it's actually, what's interesting is it's where you get the idea of xenophobia. So xenophobia is a
Yep.
fear of outside persons, right? A fear of people not from your home.
Good reference. Well
Yeah.
done.
So, and that's where the word comes from. Interesting, right? And so, that's like, because technically you can have xenophilia, which is where you embrace the outside, right? But
Hmm.
I don't know that anyone ever talks about xenophilia. It's only xenophobia. And so
Hmm.
it's one of those key themes in the film that I think is key to Greek culture and the stories of Homer's Odyssey. In fact, in the books, right, we hear the majority of the Odyssey itself, the traveling part of the tale, from Odysseus himself. He
Yes.
lands in,
Talking to
oh,
Calypso mostly, right? Calypso and
yeah. Well, in the film, yeah, but in the book, what happens is he washes up on the shores of somewhere, and I wish I could remember where it is.
yeah, it's like at the end, right?
Yeah, and he gets
They
brought
really
in.
believe in Xenia,
That's right, and they bring
right?
him in, and they
He's
wine
like,
and
make
dine
it
him,
and
and
all
they give
that.
him
Yep.
food. Yeah, and then they say, "Tell us about your travels," and
That's how it kind of starts, doesn't it?
yeah, that's actually, yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what happens, right? And it's actually Odysseus telling the story himself. He's like, I went into this cave and I met this Cyclops and all this other stuff, right? And so, that's a key theme there. I think for me, there was one big omission with the Trojan horse. I'll just quickly talk about it, but it doesn't really add to the story. But there's a very famous scene that's uh, Troy's sort of chief priest, whose name was Laocoon, who had two sons. He very famously, he sees the horse and he throws his spear at it, and it pierces the horse. And he says, if you bring this into your city walls, the Troy will fall, right? And then,
Hmm.
when he does that, one of the gods, who is on the side of the Greeks, I can't remember who it is, sends a sea serpent who kills Lao Kun and his children in the surf, literally in front of the party that's there to get the horse. And they
Hmm.
all basically go, well, I mean, he said not to, and the gods are angry at him, so we're taking it inside. And I don't think it needed to be there. That's why I didn't bring it up as a major omission. But it's something that's very close to me, because when I was an art history and classics person, there's a very famous Greek statue of Laocoon where he's trying to wrestle the snake and save his two boys, and it's at the Vatican Museum. And I always remember that. But Lao Kun didn't need to be in the story because ultimately everything still happens. They find the horse, they're not sure about the horse, and then they take it in to
Right.
the city. But the reason why that's important is because in the heavily mythologized part of the story, the gods have chosen who will do what in this story. It's sort of coming to some sort of predetermined end. And so the gods are trying to prevent him from preventing the horse from going into the city. So, but other than that, I think the horse was very well done. They do kill somebody in the horse, and they talk about how they kill him, and he's like
Hmm.
lying at the bottom of the horse, right?
Hmm.
So, I think the brutality of that is very important, and they almost get burned alive. Like that's
Hmm.
clearly something that somebody would have done. So, I think the Trojan horse was done very well, though, and
And there
showing
was
though,
some issues saying it wasn't accurate. I mean, how would they know what accurate is?
yeah,
Like
I
what the
know.
horse actually looked like.
I heard that too, and I never really got to the core of what that was. I don't know what did they. We'd never know if they did it anyways, right? So it kind of doesn't matter. Um, so then let's talk about the Cyclops because that's sort of the next part of the film, right? Or in terms of,
Polyphemus,
I think
yeah.
it's the next one. Yeah, the Cyclops. So,
We
so
probably
what's your
could
take
do
on the Cyclops?
Polyphemus and then we
Polyphemus, yeah,
Polyphemus, yeah. So I mean, I think it kicks off the whole Odyssey, right? Like
yeah,
if he literally would have just, didn't have the hubris that he had to take. Oh, and I had a quote. I had a quote.
yeah,
So we like to make sure this is apparently according to the source I looked at from Marcus Aurelius. I don't remember what part, but it says, "Do the right thing. The rest doesn't matter. Not the credit, not the praise, not even whether anyone notices." Right. So obviously, Odysseus was way pre Marcus Aurelius, but if he would have followed that guidance, we wouldn't have a story to tell, right? Because
yeah,
Polyphemus, he, and also looking at the Xenia idea, didn't exactly go with it, but neither did Odysseus's men. They went into the cave and they started chomping on some of Polyphemus's sheep, right? Not very
yes,
polite.
and cheese,
Um, and cheese. And although Polyphemus is a monster that eats humans,
yeah,
they kind of set him up for being kind of not a righteous monster, but he didn't draw the first uh, offense, put it that
yeah,
way,
yeah,
right? And Odysseus, which I think one of the main things between him and Achilles, or even Hercules, is that Odysseus kind of figures out his superpower is his intellect, his
yes,
cleverness, I
yeah,
guess, is more fair, right? So he figures out how to defeat Polyphemus. Obviously, he's a Cyclops, meaning one eye. So what are you going to do?
yeah,
Take out the eye. And he's also clever in that he calls himself nobody,
no man,
or
yes,
somebody says no man. Some people
yeah,
say
no, no,
nobody.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So that when Polyphemus yells out to the other Cyclops,
yeah,
he says, "Well, who hurt you? Who harmed you?" And he says, "Nobody or no man." And
yeah,
then the others are like, "Well, what's the deal then, dude? You're fine. Nobody's hurt you,
yeah,
right?" And instead of just taking the win, getting his men out of there alive, he has to turn around at the last moment and say his name, Odysseus, the sacker of cities, and because he wants the credit, and that pisses off. Was Poseidon's Polyphemus's father, right?
yeah.
I
That's right.
think. Yeah.
That's
So
right.
Poseidonus, as the Greeks call him, and if you ever get to go to the Temple of Poseidonus, I would recommend it if you're ever in
Hmm.
Athens. Super cool. It's in Sunio. It's just a short drive up from Athens. But that kicks off the whole thing, right? So he pissed off Poseidon, and his journey home changed from probably what 2 weeks to 10 years
Yeah,
because of that act of hubris. And instead of simply accepting that he outsmarted the beast, he had to take credit for it. And he did, in fact, create a scenario where he became the most famous potential person in history,
yeah,
largely because of an act of hubris, but it also cost him dearly. And
yeah,
I think the primary point is it cost him dearly because he was uh, not humble in his
yeah.
success.
Yeah, and interesting in the movie they don't. So there's a funny thing in the movie about all this, which is that they sort of portray Polyphemus as like nonverbal, and I was like, and this is an interesting way of of the figuring out how to portray this, right, as the director, as Nolan, the director's trying to figure this out. It was interesting that he didn't have him talk at all. And Polyphemus and Odysseus have this, like, they have full conversations, right? And
Yes, in
I
the
thought
story, yeah.
right. And so what was interesting was because there's no verbal interaction between them directly, right? Um, Odysseus doesn't in the movie turn around and go, "Well, remember that Odysseus is the one who did this to you," right? And so I thought that was kind of an interesting thing because ultimately, whether it's in the book or the movie, Odysseus is the one who goes into the house. So essentially, he sort of tries to
Yeah,
backtrack
he
on the fact that he's
violated
trespassing.
Xenia.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's basically
clearly.
trespassing, right? But he sort of tries to, and I liked how they did this in the movie, is he tries to make up for it. He's like, we'll light a fire and welcome them back. And it's like, I don't think that's how that's going to go, mate. And so,
I
and
think if
so,
you're trying to portray something verbally
yeah,
without images, you're going to have a dialogue,
I
right?
know. And so, the thing is like they just have Polyphemus is just like, biting people apart and everything. And that is in the book, but at the same time, he does that more out of anger because Polyphemus with only one eye doesn't have great depth perception, right? And it is dark cave. And so you get there and he can't tell who, and he actually he's like, who's there? And
Right.
Odysseus says, I am, we are
I am.
travelers or whatever, and we're looking for food or whatever. But then, the wounding of Polyphemus as well in his own home. It's sort of as yeah, you're right. There's this whole thing there. I just thought it was interesting it doesn't talk because also there's more than one Cyclops on this island. There's a
Of course,
couple.
or it wouldn't make any sense. Who'd he call out to say, "No man hurt me"? Right?
Exactly.
Yeah, they
So
don't. Yeah,
that was now that it's an omission in the sense of it's not the same as the story, but at the same time, I thought the one thing they did do was have the dialogue of the actors together. Was they were like he called out to Poseidon. I heard that, and
hmm
when I heard that, I thought, okay, well, they're at least keeping that connection because
well, that's
um,
pinnacle for the story.
oh yeah, yeah, and
Yes.
actually, because they go through two traumas in those moments because Polyphemus, one of the other Cyclops, throws a rock or like a tree or something in the ocean, and it creates a big wave, and it like one of the ships capsizes or something, and then later there's the storm with Poseidon, right? And
hmm
so that was an interesting one, but to me the thing is that like the Polyphemus interaction between them in the book, it feels very much like trickery as opposed to he's escaping a monster and that's the problem is that Polyphemus, he's not a dumb monster just killing people.
Right. Right.
And so that one was one where I was kind of like, nah, not having that interaction. I think that was one of the times I was disappointed because there's no hubris, there's no
So
I'm
I thought he did
Odysseus.
turn around and say, "My name was Odysseus"
No, he
in
shot
the
him in the eye
movie.
with an arrow.
I,
He shot him in the
but
eye with
did
a
he
with a
say, "My
dagger.
name is Odysseus"? Though.
I don't. Well, okay, maybe he did. I don't remember that happening. I remember that he shot the arrow, and I don't. And that one,
We're gonna have to check that.
yeah, we'll have
This
to
is a good
check that.
place to stop for this one because it's kind of kicks off the whole point, the whole story. But we should check that because that would
Yeah,
be a huge omission. I mean, that's the whole point of the hubris is what kicks off the Odyssey,
yeah,
in
but
the sense that like until that point,
yeah,
he would have just gone home,
yeah,
right? He would
yeah,
have
and
just sailed home like everybody else, you know.
yes, totally. And but the thing so that I remember it is that he didn't say it, but you know what? That's something to check, and we should check that. But it was an interesting and that's part of the challenge, right? Is that if you don't have like because Odysseus tricks Polyphemus through the conversation they have. He tricks him.
Mhm.
He sort of says like I'm here by what he kind of says is well, I'm here by myself. And he's surrounded by other men, and those men the thing with the wheat on the like the hay
Yeah,
on the back and
because
everything is
he,
actually that is
yeah,
kind of part of what it is. Depending on the story, what he tells the men is cling to the underbellies of these sheep, and
right.
then you won't get seen or whatever. But yeah, so it builds up to this hubris moment, and you're totally right. It's it's a pivotal part of the story. And
Because he has to tell his dad who did it,
yes,
right? He
and
has to
that's
tell
the whole thing.
Poseidon who did it.
Yeah,
He
Yeah,
had to
but
do it. We'll have to check. I mean, I
we'll
don't
have to.
remember
I'm going to
exactly.
check that. That's right. That's a good point
Yeah,
to check. But my notes, because I took some notes last night, my notes was that he didn't say that, and I thought that's an interesting one because he's almost snarky in the book where he's like, well, this giant doesn't really know. I tricked him into thinking it's just me, and da 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 da, and then it happens later. But in some ways though, that's one of those times where Odysseus comes off as a bit of an anti-hero because
he does
he's
that
got this.
often.
Yeah, there's this interesting
Hmm.
twinge with him where sometimes he's so humble and he doesn't want to go to war and they trick him, right? And he doesn't want to do this stuff and he's the one who recruits Achilles by tricking Achilles into exposing himself. And then later on, it's like, well, crap, this is 10 years of horrible war. Anyways,
Yeah.
this is honestly, I've been so excited to have this conversation. We have so much to talk about. I think this is gonna get stretched out a bit in a good way.
Mm.
But yeah, you're right. This is probably a good place to stop. So, and I think this is a good place to stop as well because it's such a pivotal time in the story that we're talking about. This is the time where the first major moment of hubris happens, which leads to the shipwreck, which leads to um,
Everything we're going to talk
everything
about.
else that
Yeah.
happens later. That's right. So, well, let's wrap up for today then. But stay tuned. We're gonna keep going through this story. As much as the Odyssey is an epic of a story, it's an epic and an Odyssey for us as we go through. As Mick and I go through this story ourselves. So coming up in our next one, we'll talk about Calypso and Circe and the whirlpool and the underworld. And we talked about Xenia, and we'll go back over that as well. But
The
big
siren.
concepts still to
Yeah.
come. So, anyways, but I would really love to hear everyone's own opinion on the film. So write us an email, info@pubandporch.com.
Is there a way to do a poll on listeners and
Yeah,
whether
that's a good thing.
the
You know what?
Stoic
We
types
should check with
like it?
Susan. Maybe we could do a poll on Substack or something like that.
Yeah, that'd be
Maybe
cool.
there's a
Yeah.
feature to do that. But yeah, we'd love to hear from everybody. You should subscribe on YouTube,
What the
comment.
Stoics think. We could do what the Stoics thinks, and eventually come up with our own list of movies.
Yeah, totally.
If movie choice is also tied to your philosophical choice, then maybe I
Yeah.
don't know. Let's see.
I don't know. We'll have to see. So, but yeah. So until next time, though, when we go to the next, the second half of the movie, as we talk through this. Until next time, cheers, Mick.
Sláinte. Thank you for listening to the Pup and Porch podcast. If you'd like to find out more about the podcast or its host, head over to pupandporch.com, and you can listen to all our episodes on Spotify, Apple, or whichever platform you prefer. And if you'd like to help out with the podcast, you can find us on Patreon. Drop us an email if you have a comment on any past episode, you have a suggestion for future episodes, or you have an essay on an important topic for Stoicism. Send it to us, and then we can be reached at info@pupandporch.com. Until next time, Pup and Porch out.
Today's music is provided by Heath Cantu from epidemicsound.com.